Soul Reaver was released in 1999 and 2000 for the Dreamcast and PlayStation respectively. It received critical acclaim at the time for its dark setting and story, and for its revolutionary streaming technology, which allowed locations and soundtrack to blend seamlessly with no loading times. Today, except for a hardcore following, the game is pretty much forgotten, so if you haven't played it already, I'm going to explain why it's still worth hunting down and experiencing, despite its age. Gameplay takes a lot of cues from the Legend of Zelda series. The world is open for you to explore so long as you have the relevant abilities. So while a lot of places are initially closed off to you, when you get, say, the ability to swim or the ability to climb walls or pass through barriers, you'll be able to gain access through those areas and move on through the game. It's a setup we've seen hundreds of times before, but it's tried and tested and it does wonders for this game. Exploration is by no means necessary to complete the game. You can, like Zelda, simply run through all the dungeons and other areas and ignore the optional stuff, but you really be doing yourself a disservice if you do, because the game rewards you for branching out into different areas, with spells and health upgrades and the like, but also by showing you beautiful new areas and scenery, which help to create a sense of history and place to the world. To me, that's very important in a game where the mythology and characters are also important. Now, speaking of mythology and story, there is a wealth of back history and characters that go with the Legacy of Kain series, which you won't be aware of if you've not played Blood Omen or any other game in this series. It's by no means necessary to understand and enjoy this game. It was the first game I played in the series, in fact, but having a rich history to draw upon really does help to create a believable world and setting which you can lose yourself in, and a great atmosphere. The constant sense of dread, desolation and isolation in a hostile world. I know I've mentioned Zelda, but that sort of feeling is far more akin to the Metroid games. Also, voice acting is absolutely stunning. Tony Jay, Simon Templeman and Michael Bell all deliver fantastic performances as their respective characters. Combat is quite interesting too, since you can pick up almost anything you see scattered around the environment and use it as a weapon. So rocks or pots or torches can all be picked up and used as a weapon. Also, because most of the enemies you fight are immortal vampires, you have to use a little bit of creativity in their dispatch. Simply beating the enemy into submission won't do much but reduce them to a bloody mess, so environmental hazards have to be brought into play, such as fires, water, or wall-mounted spikes, which will finish off most of them permanently. This sort of play, which encourages a little bit of creativity and a little bit of imagination when defeating your enemies, is really fun to experience. Of course, you could simply use the same staff over and over, but what's the fun in that? Experiment. Many of the puzzles take advantage of a dimension shifting mechanic, which means that you can shift between material and spirit worlds, and the world will shift and morph around you, meaning that sometimes you can gain access to new places or some objects behave differently in the spectral world. It's a really clever and versatile little feature and gives rise to some truly mind-bending puzzles. However, for the most part, the puzzles are simple block puzzles where you have to move and flip blocks around to complete a section of scenery or trigger an event. There are a hell of a lot of these puzzles. Sometimes you even have to do them while fighting off enemies, which is always really bloody annoying. But despite being somewhat repetitive, these puzzles still manage to be quite clever and inventive for the most part. It's surprising how much mileage this game gets out of the humble block puzzle, while still managing to do something different with it throughout the game. Unfortunately, Soul Reaver was released in an unfinished state, with an entire dungeon and boss absent from the game. The developers clearly spent so much time on optional areas and incidental details that they didn't have time to include those sections, which so often seems the case with ambitious projects. It's a real shame that these sections are missing, and it makes you wonder how great this game could have been if the developers had just had a little bit more time to finish the game properly. You can probably tell from my tone so far that I absolutely love Soul Reaver. Sure, it's flawed, It can be a tad confusing at times, the controls seem a bit clunky nowadays, and the abundance of browns, greys and greens in the colour scheme would make you swear that it was an Xbox 360 game. But in spite of its shortcomings, the game creates a fantastic experience and story that compels the player to explore every nook, every inviting fork in the path, and soak up everything the game has to offer. There may be better action-adventure games out there, but not many of them use such an original concept and setting, and fewer still incorporate this kind of experimental gameplay. It's one of those rare games where gameplay, art direction, voice acting, writing and music all come together in a glorious synergy to create something that is truly special.
Unspeakable pain, relentless agony, time ceased to exist. Only this torture and a deepening hatred of the hypocrisy that damned me to this hell. An eternity passed, and my torment receded, bringing me back from the precipice of madness. The descent had destroyed me, and yet I lived.